Menkaure and his queen, I'm just not going to pronounce that, I'm sorry, create a brilliant sculpture for understanding what those body forms are supposed to look like in ancient Egypt. We talked about the male body form when it came to Khafre, but here we get a sense of the female form. First of all, we have a standing sculpture, although it is still block-like. It is still married to the block and very rigid. Now it's frontal. In other words, we're meant to see it from the front, and very rigid in that, well, there's really no movement. We can see the block clearly still attached to the figures. However, the figures seem rather serene. There is no emotion. The reason for that, and the reason you see this sort of deadpan face on almost every Egyptian statue, is because emotions are incredibly difficult to depict. Think about it. When your roommate comes in and they've had a bad day, they don't throw their bag down and grunt like a 3-year-old, about to have a tantrum when they're sad. They don't stomp their feet. They don't have a giant frown. Instead, oftentimes expressions tend to be very subtle, and yet we can read them. And that subtlety is the problem, because it's very easy to accidentally caricature a figure to make them look far too emotional. And so they're going to go with this serene look. They also want the serenity that goes with the ruling class. We see them wearing traditional clothing. He's wearing effectively a loincloth, so very simple clothing. He's not wearing any kind of shirt. She's actually wearing a long dress, and you see an example, a painted example there on the right, giving us a sense of how the Egyptians would have dressed. And these would have been very sheer dresses, very lightweight material. Remember, they're basically living in a desert. And it is married to the stone. So the stone is there. Why is it there? Because at the end of the day, the last thing you want, if you're the sculptor, is for your sculpture to collapse, especially if it happens to be of a god or pharaoh. Therefore, they're going to be a little more conservative. They're going to leave that block in place as a massive support. So this almost crosses the line from in the round to very high relief when we look at it. And it is idealized. It gives us a great deal of a great idea of what Egyptian beauty was all about. Let's focus on her form for a moment. And what we get a sense of is this idea that the ideal Egyptian woman, we can assume she's ideal because she is presented with the pharaoh, probably wouldn't make it as an Insta-Snap-a-Chat-a-Book model today. What we see is someone who looks a lot stronger than we would expect. She looks like someone who could work on a farm. But if we're looking at fertility symbols, you'll notice that they have likely accentuated her breasts. And while there isn't a lot of accentuation in the thighs, we do get a sense of someone who has enough body fat to carry a pregnancy and to feed the child once born. The ankles, you'll notice, are still large, much like we saw in Mesopotamia, because of course that is a weak point in the human form. So it becomes something that you want to reinforce. And we're going to see that become more delicate and more functional as we move through the chapters. I should also note that her hair is not some kind of stylized headdress. Instead, they're stylizing the hair itself. It would have been a wig. They would have almost all been fully shaven in ancient Egypt to avoid body lice and head lice. But hair is difficult once again. And with the pharaoh, you've got the headdress, so you don't have to worry about it. With the queen, however, you do. And so they just go with the overall shape rather than trying to depict individual hairs.